What's up, you guys? Welcome to Walk the Line. We're headed down under for UFC 312, where we have not one, but two UFC titles up for grabs. First and foremost, we have the headliner, the rematch between DDP and Sean Strickland. The first fight was very controversial. Essentially, it came down to that third round, but you go out and you ask anybody who they had winning that fight, and you're pretty much going to get a different answer every time. You take a look at all the major media scoring, it's 50-50. Okay, I initially thought Strickland did enough to retain his belt. I just rewatched that fight. It really came down to that third round where Sean Strickland slightly outstruck DDP, but DDP secured some takedowns. Strickland was also quickly back up to his feet. We'll dive deep into that fight, but you know, the first fight took place pretty much exactly a year ago to date, to the time that they're going to be walking into the cage on fight night. That makes it even more interesting because as soon as that fight wrapped up, we all were waiting for the rematch. A lot of us wanted to see that fight immediately rebooked, and we get to see it, and it's going to be a good one. And a lot changes in a year, I'll tell you that, because my evaluation on this fight in a multitude of ways, from how I see the fight playing out, is completely different, and also how I view these two men. So stick around with me, and I'm going to give you guys some bold opinions on both fighters inside and outside the cage. Okay, I really like the co-main event. I'm very excited to see how Tatiana Suarez fares facing off against one of the most elite women's mixed martial artists that we've ever seen. Weili Zhang is just about as complete of a fighter as you're going to find in the fight game. And by the time she retires, she's probably going to have her head on the Mount Rushmore of women's mixed martial arts. And then meanwhile, Tatiana Suarez, although she's been very inactive since graduating from the Ultimate Fighter, I mean, she's a fighter that I've been saying would eventually get her hands on the gold and become a champion. So stick with me to see if I still feel that's the case. Now, other than that, unfortunately, we did lose that Kamaru Usman versus Jack Della Maddalena fight, which would have been a real centerpiece of this card. But I'll tell you what, I've seen a lot of hatred coming at this event as it is a pay-per-view card, and it's not extremely deep, but for us hardcore fans, we understand that there's blue chip prospects all throughout this card. And if you really know what we're getting ourselves into with some of these fights, we're excited about it. Okay, when you're talking about Taliesin Teixeira making his UFC debut, the mammoth heavyweight who's coming off that explosive KO on Dana White's Contender Series, they're throwing him in there with Justin Tafa. That's a fight that you got to be on the edge of your seat for. Okay, besides that, you're talking the brother of Ilia Topuria. You guys know Topuria was my fighter of the year last year. He's one of my favorite fighters in the game. There's no hiding that. And now you have his brother coming in, who we're going to talk a lot about. He's a very promising fighter as well. He's a blue chip prospect. And then I also want to just shout out my girl Cong, Wang, coming off that disappointing loss. But you guys know she's a real talent on the feet. I like the matchup there against Bruna. Brasil, Cody Steele makes his UFC debut, the 7-0 undefeated prospect who had a big time performance on Dana White's Contender Series this last season. And also Gabriel Santos takes on Jack Jenkins. That is a sleeper fight as well. So let's get pumped for this card, boys. You guys know how we do it over here. We're going to start at the bottom of this card, work our way up towards the top. I got timestamps for you guys. You guys can jump to any specific fight you want. We're going to talk about how we see this fight playing out. We'll jump into the betting odds. We'll talk about where we see the value and all that. If you're new here, please, guys, like this video and subscribe. It means the world to me, guys. If you guys could all just pause for a second and like this video. I have huge things coming up. I've been telling you guys about this for a long time. I'm going to give you a little sneak peek. I'm going to be working with some of the best fighters in the game moving forward. Okay, I can't talk too much about it, but you're going to start to see me working with and giving content to you guys that is mixed with some of the best fighters in the game. I'm not talking about just UFC caliber fighters. I'm talking about some of the fighters that are at the top of the game. Okay, guys, so stay tuned for further information on that. I'm going to have a live interactive show coming your guys' way that's going to be coming out towards the first quarter, the second quarter of this year. Okay, so I'm not just on the mic telling you guys that all these big things are coming and nothing's going to come from it. Okay, there's just a lot of things going behind the scenes, and I'm very pumped to unravel that to you guys. So subscribe so you don't miss none of that. Go catch me on my social media. Please go follow me on IG and Twitter. I got it scrolling below. If anybody wants to work with me for my official plays, reach out to me. I even got my email scrolling below, or you could DM me on social media. All right, guys.
The teller.
In the welterweight division, Kevin Jousset welcomes Jonathan Micallef to the octagon as Micallef looks to make his UFC debut. Now, he comes in off a beautifully landed triangle choke that he pulled off his back on DWCS. That led him to getting the contract. Micallef shows some really promising skills down on the mat, but I do worry a little bit how he's going to fare against Jousset on the feet, because Jousset has that systematic city kickboxing type of striking. It works very well for him. He is a very large welterweight fighter too. He's one of the larger fighters you'll see in this division. And if Jousset keeps this fight standing, I think he does have a clear advantage. Even though it's very early on in Micallef's fighting career, we've already seen him brutally hurt. You take a look at the lone loss that he's had. You could pull that full fight up on YouTube. It was really a barn burner against Alden Bates. That fight went all the way to the 4th round, a lot of back and forth. Eventually, he was hit with big strikes on the feet, and he was put out. Okay, so he does show to be vulnerable defensively. I'm not crazy about what he puts off offensively as well. He's an opportunist type of grappler, but there's a lot of room for growth in his game at just 25. We could definitely see development from him there. He has a nice frame for this division, seems to be a pretty good athlete, but I think that Jousset can really pick him apart standing. And Kevin Jousset is a fighter that don't just look at him as a one-dimensional striker, because he is a black belt in judo. He has solid hips. He's not easy to take down to the mat, which is going to be paramount in this matchup here. Now, we take a look at what he's been doing inside the octagon. It does say that Jousset has a 62% takedown defensive ratio. When I saw that, you guys know I'm always double-checking these numbers, and these numbers are, for the most part, very accurate. But I know he's only fought in the UFC 3 times, and I'm saying 62% takedown defensive ratio. Who took him down? I don't remember anybody taking him down. And of course, I went back, checked the numbers as I'm also rewatching the tape. I don't see anybody taking Jousset down. Battle did get on top of him at one point in time in that fight in a kind of opportunistic way, but never really solidified an official takedown. Jousset has very good hips, and if you shoot recklessly on him, he can stifle you, he can reverse you with the judo throw, he can get on top of you, and he could rain down heavy ground and pound as well. You take a look at some of his fights in the regional scene, I mean, he'll put it on you down on the mat as well. He's not just a stand-up striker. Okay, so I think there's going to be opportunities for him to even land damage down on the mat. I don't think he should go that avenue. That's exactly what Micallef is going to want. He's going to want a bunch of wild scrambles going on and all that. But I do believe Jousset should try to avoid those types of scenarios. But I also still could see him having success in those types of positions. Because even when you take a look at the victory that Micallef had against Muhammad Adu, he prevailed with that choke, but he almost got caught in an early Darce choke. We've seen him on his back at times when he's in these wacky scrambles, even in his regional tape. And Jousset is a little underrated there. I think that Jousset has a lot of avenues for success throughout this fight. He comes in very hungry. Of course, he's coming off a brutal knockout loss. We have to mention that, right? He took that loss against Brian Battle, got finished in the 2nd round. He did have some success early on in that fight. It wasn't like he was completely outclassed in there, okay? He looked quite good early on, and Brian Battle is the real deal. So you gotta note that. Brian Battle is a way more proven fighter than a Micallef, and I like the fact that a primed Kevin Jousset is hungry to bounce back with the victory, as he's just 31 years old. The only question you could kind of have there is that knockout loss just came about 3 months ago. So how is the brain rested? But this is a good matchup because Micallef is not really a threat there, in my opinion. So he doesn't have to worry too much about getting hit with the big shot. All right, so let's take a look at the betting odds for this fight. Kevin Jousset is currently right around a -205 favorite. He's slightly over a 2-1 favorite. And I wouldn't be surprised if this line continues to creep up. I could see him settling in at a -240, 250. I think that the more people dissect this fight and see that he really has an avenue to victory, just keeping the fight standing, which he's shown to be pretty good at. He has good hips, and then he'll be the much more technical striker. Does he find a finish? Does he find that KO? One thing I've noticed about Jousset, he's not a fighter that's super eager to get fighters out of there. He has no problem kind of picking you apart and outpointing you. But it's hard to say because Micallef has an aggressive style, so he may force that type of situation. But I will settle in with a Kevin Jousset unanimous decision pick. He may even win this fight 30-27, probably dominates every round. A special shout out to my partners over at BetUS. If anyone's looking to sign up to a new sportsbook, reach out to me, shoot me an email or DM me on social media. I will give you my referral link over to BetUS. You'll get a 150% match on your first 3 deposits. We head over to the flyweight division where we have 2 fighters that had a lot of success on the road to UFC in Hyun Song Park and Nyamjargal Tumendemberel. Now, Tumendemberel just came up short in his UFC debut against Carlos Hernandez. Now, that fight went to a split decision. If he would have got the nod there, he would have also been 9-0 undefeated. I thought the judges got that right. I shouldn't say the judges. I mean, I guess that still would be plural, but 2 of the judges got it right. One of them got it wrong. Okay, because I did believe that Carlos Hernandez should have won that fight via unanimous decision. You run the numbers back, Hernandez outstruck him 2-1. He had significant control time and all that. Now, one of the issues I have with Nyamjargal is, although he does have a nice long frame for the division, and you see him here listed as having a 67-inch wingspan, just a 1-inch advantage over Hyun Sung Park, I see him listed on other sites as having a 71-inch wingspan, which seems much more likely to me because he's long. You watch him on tape, I mean, he's long. So understand he probably has more like a 4 to a 5-inch reach advantage here. But the problem I have with him is he doesn't really use it to his advantage that much, and he kind of fights like a long man. And I don't mean that in a complimentary way. I'm talking more giraffe syndrome style, if you guys know what I'm talking about. He has like a lackadaisical kind of style that's like he's in a street fight. If you guys know what I'm talking about, he's very loose in there, and some fighters can get away with that, but I don't think he has the skill set to get away with that. All right. And when you're matched up with the fighter like Hyun Sung Park, who's very technical, okay, he's very quick, he's very fast for this division, he's going to have a significant speed advantage here. I see Park being the fighter that is landing the cleaner shots. Okay, I see him closing the distance with his footwork, even landing up to the head, but he could also drop down and work the body, as we saw him do to Shannon Ross. He hit Shannon Ross with a nasty liver shot, followed him down to the mat, finished him up there. He looked great in his UFC debut against Sunguk Choi, where he pulled off the 3rd round submission, pulled off that rear naked choke. He shows diversity in his finishing ability. All right, 4 KOs, 4 subs, went to a decision 1 time. Okay, he's a fight finisher. I'm definitely on Hyun Sung Park. I really like what I see from him. I guess more of the question here is, does he find a finish? Okay, and I don't want to completely overlook Nyamjargal because, yes, he's just 26 years old. He does show toughness. He's never been finished, and maybe we see him start to sharpen up his skill set. But right now, you're talking about Park being a fighter that has a lot of momentum behind him. He's more in his physical prime, and he just looks better on tape. He looks to be the superior fighter in here. Okay, but Nyamjargal scrappy, but also the fact that this fight's taking place in the flyweight division, I think it's a little less likely that Nyamjargal can pull a rabbit out of his hat, landing that big shot. You know what I'm talking about? Sometimes you'll see a lower level fighter in the middleweight division or the light heavyweight division go in there and bring it and just crack the opposition with the big shot that shakes things up. I don't really see that here. He's only had 2 knockouts out of his 9 fights. He does show some solid groundwork at times. I mean, he has 5 subs. Obviously, he knows how to find a submission, but all in all, I don't see him being super technical with his jiu-jitsu game. I think Park can handle that all day, and I'm going to lean towards Park getting a decision victory. I will say that this fight goes to decision. Hyun Sung Park right now, we have very premature lines as this fight was one of the more recent fights added to the card. We're seeing him right around a -275. He's just under a 3-1 favorite. And I definitely expected him to open up as a favorite. That seems a tad bit high for a match like this. I think people are quite high on him after the performance he just had against Shannon Ross. Let's also not forget that Shannon Ross gets finished by everybody. Okay, maybe we pump the brakes there a little bit. And then all the competition that he's faced before that, very low-level competition. So, maybe Nyamjargal is a step above those guys, and maybe he would do the same thing to Shannon Ross. So keep that in mind. But I do have Park winning a decision, and he is the superior fighter, in my opinion. So the days of Cong Wang coming into the octagon as a quadruple-digit favorite are put on pause, but that's not going to stop her from being a pretty big favorite still here against Bruna Brasil. Brasil comes into this fight off probably the biggest victory of her career. She went out there and got that decision victory over Molly McCann. It was a much-needed W. There's been a lot of ups and downs throughout her career. She's been a little bit of a disappointment when you take into consideration she had that phenomenal KO on DWCS where she got the contract. In retrospect, we kind of understand that that was more of an opportunity she just had against a lower-level fighter, right? She went out there, did what she should have done, but Marnik Mann is a very low-level fighter and was completely undersized. She then makes her UFC debut against Denise Gomes, where she shows defensive flaws, gets KO'd there in the 2nd round, gets a victory over Shauna Bannon. Okay, but this is actually what I want to highlight. If you go back to the early part of her career, she had a couple of submission victories. She had one over Alexia Thinara, who is a fighter that just really showed out on this past season of DWCS. She's a girl that we will see make some noise in the UFC. She pulled off a guillotine choke against her. She also had a guillotine choke against a chick named Velosa back in the day. I just wanted to mention those 2 submission victories because I think that if she's going to have success in this fight, it's going to have to somehow come by way of pulling off a sub or some type of grappling. That's not really her strength. She's more of a striker. She's going to try to hang with Wang, but I don't think that that's going to go too well for her. Maybe she can land a counter shot and put herself into an opportunistic situation and pull off a sub, similarly to what we just saw Gabriela Fernandez do in that last fight. Cong Wang came into that fight as high as like a minus 1,300 favorite. Okay, it was a massive upset. We did talk about on the show that she wasn't completely proven and those lines were ridiculous. So I just want to say that I did point that out. But Gabriela Fernandez is also not a bad fighter. She's a well-rounded fighter. Is Bruna Brasil on the same level as a Fernandez? We'll see. Okay, but you're going to see a different type of betting line here. So let's go talk about the betting line here because Cong Wang is no longer a minus 1,300 favorite. She's right around a minus 390. Okay, she's just under a 4-1 favorite, which is still steep odds, especially considering this is a women's mixed martial arts fight. I'll tell you what, I think that this is a spot where Cong Wang is really going to bounce back with the solid W. I think that she's going to get a knockout. Bruna Brasil is much slower than Cong Wang. She's a good technical fighter, Bruna Brasil, but Cong Wang is just dynamic and she's unorthodox with her striking. We've seen her have high-level kickboxing matches against fighters like Valentina Shevchenko. I mean, she's really high level. She's very aggressive too. That's a key point that I want to bring here because you don't typically see me picking women to get a KO. Okay, it happens seldom in the octagon, but I do have Wang getting a KO in this fight. She pushes the pace. Even in that last fight, it cost her. She was countered. Okay, but she was very aggressive. She was landing the cleaner shots early in that fight. I mean, she's landing 5.81 strikes per minute in the early portion of her UFC career. She's being landed on at 1.63 per minute, although one of those strikes that she absorbed cost her a fight when she was dropped and subbed. All right, she hasn't shown to be that easy to take down. Curious to see if Bruna could try to get some takedowns against her. She's kind of planning, or she should have been prepping for a similar type of stylistic fight than what she just had against Molly McCann. So she's definitely putting in that type of work in the gym, and she may be able to pull something off like that. But I think that Cong Wang is going to land damage in this fight. We've seen Bruna Brasil hurt before, and I think we're going to see it again. And, you take a look at her 2 losses. She's been knocked out in 2 of them. I think Cong Wang makes it 3. And is there value on Cong Wang there? Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that fight when we do the prop edition video. Going into the last season of Dana White's Contender Series, Cody Steele was one of my most anticipated fighters to see perform. Now, his first fight fell through. I was a little frustrated to see that. I had an official play locked in on him in that first matchup. Dana White and the UFC brass found him a new fight against Chasen Blair, I believe his name was. If you guys remember that fight, boy, did Cody Steele show out. Right now, going into that fight, some people kind of looked at him as more of a grappling-based fighter because he's very frequent in the grappling scene. He has a wrestling background. He's active in the jiu-jitsu world and all that. But in that fight, he showcased once again that he is just a real fighter. Okay, he suffers a little bit from JSS, Jeremy Smith syndrome, which if you guys are new to the show, that's just a little tip of the hat to my old boy from back in the day, Jeremy Smith, who was a brute of a kid back in the day. He always had his lugs laced up loosely, but he was one phone call away from meeting me at the park, to handle some business. Didn't matter if we were fighting 3 or 4 kids. He was taking 4 or 5 of them. He was one of those kids, if you guys remember, that just looked like a man when he was 14, 15 years old, but he always brought the fight. And Cody Steele has a little bit of that syndrome, if you know what I'm saying. He's marching forward. Okay, he's looking to land damaging blows on you. This guy is the real deal. I really liked what we saw from him on the show. And Chasen Blair was the fighter that was supposed to have maybe an advantage with his striking in that matchup, right? Cody Steele was supposed to have to mix things up, as Chasen Blair had a little bit of a decorated striking background. But even on the feet, you saw how that fight played out. I mean, Steele just continuously marched forward, was damaging him to the body, eventually finished him by landing a big shot to the body. And I think that Cody Steele has some serious potential. He's just 7-0, okay, but you can't really look at him as that type of fighter. He's been training MMA for a while, and he has a lot of other combat sports experience, so he's well versed. So I'm not really overly concerned with the fact that he has 7 pro MMA fights and Rongzhu has 31 professional fights. I'm really not worried about that. Rongzhu is a fighter that has consistently came up short when fighting in an official UFC fight. I know he's had some recent success over in the road to UFC, but when he has the real deal UFC fights taking place, he's losing them. Not only is he losing them, he's getting finished. I faded him in his last fight. I had an official play on Chris Padilla. If you guys remember that, man, I had a solid underdog play on Chris Padilla. Go run it back. Remember what I said about that fight. Chris Padilla cracked him with the big elbow. He finished him up. You take a look at the other fights that he had in UFC. I mean, he got submitted by Ignacio Bahamendez, who's known more as a kickboxer, and Bahamendez caught him with a crafty Bravo choke in the 3rd round. Okay, so he comes up short in these big type of fights. He also took a loss to Cazulo Vargas, who was never really a UFC caliber fighter, for being honest. So, I mean, I do have major concerns with Rongzhu here. I think that Cody Steele is going to be a clear step above. You also take a look at the frames, and it looks like Cody Steele's undersized, but he is a fighter that's fought up in the welterweight division in the regional scene. I really like him down here to the lightweight division. He's stout, man. He's a stout dude. So I'm not overly concerned with the reach disadvantage or the fact that he's shorter. Don't worry about none of that. Cody Steele is going to be the superior fighter. And yeah, he'll be superior from a technical standpoint, but where he's really going to be superior is just he's going to have that killer instinct in him. He's going to be the real fighter in there. And not to say that Rongzhu is not a tough fighter. We've seen him take big damage, and he'll wave you forward, and he kind of tries to play the part in there. But really, you see a step down in his activity once he gets hit with those big shots. And I think that Cody Steele is going to get him out of there. I think Cody Steele is going to work the body and crack him up. And I think that Rongzhu is going to look for a way out one way or another. And we'll take a look at the betting odds where we're seeing Cody Steele right around a -225 favorite. Okay. And I don't really think that line's that bad. I think that it will eventually get worse. And I'm a little surprised he didn't open up more around a -300. Okay. So basically what I'm saying, guys, is zoo wrongs don't make a right. Gabriel Santos finally got that long awaited first ever UFC victory in his last fight. He's looking to double it up now and go on a 2-fight winning streak in the UFC. He's taking on Jack Jenkins. Fights taking place in the featherweight division. Gabriel Santos, just 28 years old. You take a look at the 2 losses that he took since joining the UFC, and they're very unfortunate. You guys know I had him defeating Lerone Murphy, who's one of the top fighters in this division, right? He took that fight on short notice. I thought that he clearly won that fight. It was close, but I definitely thought that he won that fight. Then in his next fight, he's having a world of success against another talented and dangerous fighter in David Onama, a fighter that's kind of under the radar. He's having a world of success. He got a little over aggressive, and then he ended up getting finished. If you guys remember, Onama pulled off the Israel Adesanya celebration tactics that had a lot of our blood boiling when he did that, right? I don't know. It's a little uncalled for, right? There was no bad blood going on, and he's sitting there just shooting him up with like 1,000 arrows standing over him, screaming in his face. But that was a tough one. You have to love the way that Gabriel Santos bounced back and finally got that W against Yiza in that last fight, showing how dynamic he is. He's a very aggressive fighter, which can cost him at times, and I think that is a little bit of an issue in this spot because Jack Jenkins carries some serious power. But I like the fact that Santos is more athletic, dynamic, and diverse with his striking, whereas Jack Jenkins, he may carry some more pop and some more power. He has very heavy calf kicks, but he's a little robotic at times, and I do think that Jack Jenkins is a good fighter, but when you take a look at what he's been doing, he went out there and did what he should have done by finishing the old Herbert Burns there. Got the 3rd round finish. Before that, he was injured against Chipe Mariscal. Mariscal is really making some noise in this division as well. And I will say that Jack looked pretty good before the injury occurred, so we'll give him some credit there. But I thought, speaking of bad decisions, right, you could pull up, go Google these fights and type in MMA decisions, and you'll see that the majority of the MMA media is agreeing with me here. I'm not just throwing these out recklessly, guys. If I say that there was a bad decision, I mean, I got something behind it. The Jamal Emmers fight, that was a tough one, okay? That was a real tough one. I thought Jamal Emmers did enough to win that fight, and I think that if the Brazilian Gabriel Santos implements some similar type of tactics that Emmers did, just being more light on his feet and being more athletic and fluid with the striking. He can outpoint Jack Jenkins here. He needs to slow the pace down of this fight. I don't think that he needs to go in here looking for a finish because he can run into some serious trouble and he can be countered and can be KO'd. If we see a finish in this fight, I have a feeling that it'll be more of Jack cracking him with a big counter. Not to say that Gabriel's not live for his own finish. I mean, he looks for those types of finishes. But I think that Santos is going to win a decision here. That's the route I'm going to go. I'm going to say Santos wins a decision. Hopefully the crowd doesn't play too much of a factor with Jack having the hometown edge. But I don't think that will be the case. I think Santos just does clearly enough to get the job done. Now, he opened up right around minus 190 on a lot of books. He's settling in right around a flat 2-1 favorite as a minus 200. I don't see a lot of value on that line. That's a line that we can continue to monitor throughout the fight week, but I just don't see a lot of value paying 2-1 odds on Santos. I love what he's all about, but he's shown to make mistakes in there. And Jack Jenkins is a fighter we really don't have our finger on just yet. He's talented and he really may start to make some noise in this division. He's just 31, so he may continue to evolve. This is the biggest fight of his life. We don't know how he's going to show up. I'm not coughing up 2-1 odds there. The value's in the dog, in my opinion. In the lightweight division, we have Quillan Salkilld taking on Anshul Jubli. Now, Jubli did have that successful UFC debut, but if you guys remember, or if you kind of know what was going on in there, man, he was exposing a fighter in Jenkins who has zero grappling, okay? And you got to give him credit there. You got to give Anshul credit for the fact that he showed high fight IQ for taking the path of least resistance. And I'll also say this, in his follow-up fight where he lost to Mike Breeden, he showcased that he's a technical fighter. I think he is a fighter that pays attention to the details, okay? But he still ended up getting caught with big shots in the third round. He got finished up there. I think that he's a fighter that's lacking physically. I believe that Quillan will be the better athlete here. He'll be more physically strong. And Quillan is a fighter that's well-rounded. He's not going to be exposed down in the mat. You're not going to see Jubli go out there and taking him down and just outclassing him down in the mat. Quillan, although you only see 2 documented KOs, you go to pull up some of his fights on YouTube and you could pull up some of those KOs, one of those 2 KOs, and you could see that he has some power. He's a little wild with his striking, but he can knock you out, and it's not out of the realm that he could land a big shot on Jubli, who's coming into this fight wounded, right, after taking the damage that he just took against Breeden. So that's not out of the realm. Quillan could definitely hold his own down in the mat, and he can mix things up, and I think he's just a superior fighter. I think that he handles business here. Okay, Jubli, I understand why he's getting an opportunity to fight in the UFC, and I'm not going to say that he's not deserving of that because, okay, he was undefeated leading up to that last fight. I mean, just 7 pro fights, and he did what he needed to do on the road to UFC and all that, but the UFC wants to start to get some momentum in India, and I'm all in for it. I want to see mixed martial arts grow in that country, right? I forget the exact statistic, but I mean, India may have the most amount of young men in one country. I believe that may be a factual stat, but you guys know what I'm talking about. I mean, it would be great for the sport, but right now there's just not really any type of high-level fighters that could represent them, and I don't really believe that Jubli is going to be that fighter because he's already 30 years old. I think he's going to lose this fight. I think that he's probably going to lose the next one if they give him another opportunity, and India will have to search for another fighter to lead the pack for them there. We take a look at the odds on this fight, and it looks like they are in agreement for what I've been talking about here. I mean, because Quillan is a minus 355, and we'll see how that line moves. It's still a little premature here. I wouldn't be surprised if he's a minus 450, minus 400 favorite, and that's saying something because it's not like he is this blue chip prospect that's coming in and is really promising and is a fighter that's guaranteed to dominate and hold his own UFC status. Okay, we'll see what he's about. He had a good performance on Dana White's Contender Series. He looked pretty good in that fight, but the book's not out on him, and he's a massive favorite here, and he's deserving of being that. Buckle up for this one, boys. I think we're going to see a knockout in the lightweight division. We have Tom Nolan taking on Slava Borshchev. Tom Nolan, this dude, he's all over the place, right? You take a look at the work that he's been putting in, right? Has that phenomenal KO against my boy Bogdan Grad on Dana White's Contender Series, another early KO on his resume. Makes his UFC debut against Nicholas Mota, gets starched in just over a minute, right? Then he follows that up with a crazy knockout against Victor Martinez. But remember, he was dropped early in that fight. There was a lot of blood in the cage. I mean, he takes damage, right? He shows to have defensive flaws. And then in his last fight also takes on Alex Reyes, right? The brother of Dominic Reyes. He was a huge favorite. He was the biggest favorite on the night. And that was a fight that played out much more competitively than a lot of us thought. So I'm willing to bet that a lot of you guys are down on the Tom Nolan stock. But I would just tell you, listen, he's 24 years old. He has a nice frame for this division. There's going to be some growing pains with him, but he is somewhat of a promising prospect. Borshchev is no joke, though. He's a high-level kickboxer that displays serious power. We've seen it on display multiple times, all starting off with the victory he had on Dana White's Contender Series where he knocked out Chris Duncan, followed that up with the first-round KO over Dakota Bush, knocked out Mahashate recently. He shows to have serious toughness. So we know that he's getting in a lot of work with Team Alpha Male. He's trying to be a more well-rounded fighter, and we'll see his wrestling develop. But really, the X factor in this fight is the chin and durability of Borshchev compared to Nolan. I feel much more confident that if we see these fighters exchanging and either of these fighters getting hit with a big shot, it's Borshchev that's going to look to push through it. Right? We saw him drop by Chase Hooper and take a world of damage. Yeah, you could say it was a little suspect that he got caught with the strike from Hooper, but you still have to give him some credit for the toughness that he displayed, refusing to just give in. He was going to look for any type of way to keep that fight going, and eventually it was too much for him, and Hooper caught him with the sub. But you think of the Nazim Sadykhov fight, just never out of that fight, took a lot of damage, was looking to push through, just went to war with James Jean Top. I mean, he is very tough, whereas I think that when Nolan gets cracked with the big shot, he's shown that he will fall down and he will be put out like he was against Mota. So I like that X factor for Borshchev as he's a little bit more durable here in a fight where we're going to see them trading some big shots. I think that favors Slavoklas. We take a look at the betting odds. Borshchev is right around a -150 favorite. Nolan is the dog, right around a +120 to 130 underdog. And I kind of like the value on Slavoklas. That line's not too steep for me. And this is a fight that I definitely want to talk more about in the prop edition. I'm sensing an under. I'm sensing a KO in this fight one way or another. Like I said, I think Borshchev can push through some of the damage that Nolan will put his way, but I wouldn't be shocked if Nolan can find his own KO. I just think it's more likely that Borshchev finds his own KO, but I think we're going to see a high pace of this fight. Neither fighter really looks to push with the wrestling, so there should be a lot of time for these fighters to exchange, and I think someone's going to land something heavy in this fight. It's just more likely going to be Borshchev. Now, when the UFC announced that the younger brother of Ilia Topuria, Aleksandre Topuria, was going to be making his UFC debut, I was pumped for it. All right. I was waiting to hear that news for quite a bit. Obviously, Aleksandre is a prospect that's been on a lot of our radar for some time. But I'll say this, I was very disappointed to see the initial matchup between him and Cody Haddon. Now, Haddon recently pulled out of that matchup, and now in steps Colby Thicknesse. You want to talk about me being disappointed? I was also very disappointed when I pulled up Colby Thicknesse and saw that he really wasn't that thick. I was expecting to see a whole different animal, and he's actually quite the slenderness, if you ask me, Colby slenderness. Okay, but on a serious note, Aleksandre Topuria, this is a solid fighter. If you're looking at his record and you're saying, oh, why is he 5-1, right? Well, how has he already taken a loss in such a limited amount of fights? Do take note that loss came by way of Ivo Ivanov, who is a much larger fighter, who was, in my opinion, on performance-enhancing drugs. You take a look at the way he looked in that fight. That whole full fight's on YouTube. He was jacked up. And at the time, Aleksandre was about 19 years old. Okay, that fight took place in 2015, and he was looking quite good in the early portion of that fight. He was landing on Ivanov. It just eventually, some of his takedowns were stuffed. I mean, Ivanov was such a larger fighter. It was tough for him to get him down, and it wore him out, and he got hit with some big shots, and he gave in. The point I'm making is do not let that loss concern you that much. I really don't think that it has anything to do with the fighter that he is today. Now, since that loss, if you want to have somewhat of a concern, you could say he's been very inactive. Okay, that's a fact, right? But if you take a look at the 3 victories that he's had since that loss, all 3 of them coming by way of knockout in the first round. You watch him on tape, he's very well-rounded. Obviously, he spends a lot of time and gets in a lot of work with his brother, Ilia Topuria, who is at the pinnacle of the sport. And in my opinion, is, I mean, of course you could argue Micallef, but when you're talking about just a complete skill set, when you talk about the boxing skills, the striking skills of Topuria mixed in with the wrestling and grappling, it's right there with Islam Micallef. Okay, that's how elite it is. And that's who Aleksandre is training with. You see Aleksandre in the corner of Ilya in his big fights. All right, he trains and surrounds himself with high-level people. You could pull up tape of both the Topuria brothers getting in work with fighters like Guram, Kutelaze, and Merab Divalashvili. Of course, they're all Georgian. They put in some work together. But I just think that Aleksandre is a fighter that even though he only has 6 professional fights, he's been very active in the gym. He's been learning and refining his skills, and he's been waiting for this opportunity. And I think he's going to be very prepared. I'm very happy that he's not taking on Cody Haddon, because I actually did have Cody Haddon winning that fight. I was going to pick Haddon. I'm very high in Haddon. I just think he's a problem. I like the activity of the youngster there. And there's no reason for me to dissect that fight. I don't have to. This is the fight we're talking about. Colby Thicknesse is not a bad prospect. He's 7-0, 25 years old. He is taking the fight on short notice. He shows to have a well-rounded skill set. Okay. He throws a lot of feints. He has like this herky-jerky type of striking. I think that Topuria's striking is just going to be much more balanced and much more technical. And I don't think he's going to bait and buy in on those feints. And eventually, if we see some big strikes landed, it will be Aleksandre that's cracking him with some big shots. And I also think we're going to see Aleksandre change levels and use some of his wrestling and grappling skills that will impress some of you guys there. Now, Thicknesse has some jiu-jitsu skills as well. Okay, so this may not be a walk in the park, but all in all, I think you guys will be pleasantly pleased with what you see from the younger brother of Ilia Topuria. And hopefully now he starts to be a very active fighter and builds up his own name. There's some real potential behind him. It's not just that he's the younger brother of Ilya. Trust me on that, okay? There's something serious behind what he brings to the table. I'm going to say, I don't know. I don't know if he gets the knockout, man. Thicknesse has been pretty crafty in there, but he's been fighting lower level fighters. I mean, Topuria may get that knockout. That's what he's been doing as of recently, right? In the last 3 fights, even though they're spaced out so far apart, he's going in there and he's knocking these dudes out. And I'm going to say he replicates it. I'm going to say he gets the finish, a KO / TKO. We'll see how that goes. So I'm going to say he finds the finish there. Francisco Prado, who is really one of the more promising young prospects in the UFC right now, is bumping up to the welterweight division to take on Jake Matthews in his home country. This is a big task for him, right? I do believe he's going to be undersized in this fight. Another issue for Prado here is that we've seen him struggle with his takedown defense. How can you forget his UFC debut where he was really smothered by Jamie Malarkey? It was a very frustrating fight too, because before that, and even after that, as he showed in the Azatar fight, when he can keep the fight standing, and let me also say in the Zelleber fight, okay, he did lose the Zellhuber fight, but that was a fight that played out pretty closely. He won that first round, and Daniel is a very talented fighter. I mean, just to be able to hang with him, it shows you the level that his striking's on, okay? But the point I'm making is that he is a dangerous striker, okay? He is a dynamic and dangerous striker, and he can knock you out. He could sub you. Yeah, he was doing that throughout the early part of his pro career against lower level fighters down in South America. But when you watch the tape, there's just no questioning that he is dangerous there. Okay. But when he can't keep it there, that's a problem. And if Jamie Malarkey was able to do that to him not too long ago down in the lightweight division, I definitely believe that Jake Matthews can change levels on him and get some takedowns in this fight. And it could be a major problem because when he gets those takedowns, I don't know if Prado's going to be able to get up. We just saw in Jake Matthews' last fight, we saw him use those types of tactics at times against Phil Rowe. I mean, he was really a step ahead of Phil Rowe throughout the entire fight. He outstruck him, but he had almost 4 minutes of control time. Phil Rowe is a big welterweight and a fighter that should probably be harder to take down than a Prado. Now, the only thing you can say is that Prado is very young, and you may see that rapid development, especially when he knows he has to work on his takedown defense. So that's kind of the X factor here. And then before you take him down, you still got to go through that danger there. Okay. It's you still got to close the distance, and Prado will have opportunities to land on you. And, all in all, I will say I was actually close to picking Prado here just to kind of enlighten you guys on my thought process on this fight. But I had to settle down and be mature about my pick here. Although I like Prado, I like everything he's about, and I really want to see him have success. With him going up in weight and taking on a crafty veteran in Jake Matthews. Matthews is just 30 years old, and he's been in the UFC for a long time. One of my old sayings, I used to always say this, is that Jake Matthews was born in the UFC, right? His mom laid an egg right in the middle of the octagon. She hatched him because he had a very early start to his UFC career coming off the Ultimate Fighter. I think it was that Aussie versus the UK season. I believe that's what it was. But, I mean, Jake Matthews, he's never really lived up to the hype, at least the hype that I had for him once upon a time. And when he had that knockout over the Andre Fiallo, was just a beautiful KO. And at the time, we didn't really know that Andre's chin was that diminished. Or you could actually say it wasn't. You could actually say that Matthews was the fighter to diminish his chin, but he looked lightning fast in that fight. Then he follows that up with a loss to Matthew Semmelsberger. I mean, that was so disappointing, especially when you look at it in retrospect. Submitted Darius Flowers, then he loses to the Phenom Michael Morales, bounces back with the Phil Rowe victory. We'd like to see that, but he never was able to really continue to put things together. When you dissect some of his victories, some of these fighters are very unfamiliar these days. Emil Meek, remember him? He was that Viking who had no takedown defense, an older Diego Sanchez, a Rostim Akman, Shinsho Anzi. I mean, a lot of these names are unfamiliar. Okay, so and I understand that the losses that he's had are to recognizable and respectable names like Kevin Lee, even Andrew Holbrook at the time, I believe, was undefeated. Tony Martin, Sean Brady, Morales, but still, man, I don't think that Matthews ever lives up to be what we thought he could have been maybe once upon a time. I'll say that much. But I do think that he could squeak by here with another victory. We take a look at the betting odds for this fight. Jake Matthews is right around a minus 205 to a minus 225. That's the range we're seeing right now. I do not like those odds. I think that Prado is live to potentially come in here and get a W in a variety of ways. Maybe he gets that knockout, or maybe he's just able to stuff the takedowns or get back up to his feet and just get the better of the striking. It's a tall task for him, though, because he still, even if it goes to the judges' scorecards, if the fight plays out somewhat close, he may not get the nod there. But at plus 175, I think the value still on the young Argentine fighter who eventually will put it together. By the time he's 26, 27 years old, he will have settled into the UFC. He'll be a legit, complete fighter. In the light heavyweight division, we have Jimmy the Brute Crute taking on Rodolfo Bellato. This fight is a life-changing fight for Crute. Okay, to put things into perspective for you guys, he's just 28 years old. But if you guys remember, after he took that last loss in the rematch that he had against Alonzo Menefield, got subbed up in the second round, he was really down on himself. If you guys remember some of the posts that he put out, kind of was contemplating retirement, or he was coming to the realization that he wasn't cutting it in the UFC. Maybe some of those thoughts were a little premature. As you guys know, the fight game is fickle, especially in the light heavyweight division. You put together 1 or 2 wins in a row, and next thing you know, you're a fighter that's got a number next to your name, or you're fighting to get a number next to your name. I mean, you see Dominic Reyes having a great resurgence. All right, so just remember, Jimmy Crute was a fighter that people were very high on back in the day, including myself. As he came through DWCS, he had that first-round KO over Chris Birchler. And not only did he get a KO in that fight, we actually knew that he was a fighter whose main skill set was really down on the mat, right? He was known to have a pretty nasty BJJ game. I think he was like a brown belt at the time. And we started to see some of those skills unravel. Remember, he submitted Paul Craig, the very dangerous jiu-jitsu player in his own right, submitted him with just 9 seconds left to go in their fight. Followed that up with the KO over Sam Alvey. Now, where we started to see some issues with him was, of course, the loss against Misha Serkinov. That was a fight where he was very overly aggressive and put himself in a vulnerable situation. I really feel that was a fight that he should have won if he would have fought a more intelligent fight. He was very young at the time. Okay, you're going to see those types of growing pains with fighters. He did bounce back with 2 very solid victories over Michał Oleksiejczak and Modestas Bukauskas. Not very high-level fighters, but respectable names in the division. You still got to give him credit there. And then things really started to unravel for him as he gets KO'd by Anthony Smith, KO'd by Jamal Hill, the former champ, all right? And then he was en route to defeating Alonzo Menefield in the first fight, okay, but kept making these defensive flaws. He would kind of, you see him, he's kind of slow and lethargic at times. He kind of gets a little plotty with his feet. He was getting tagged with some big shots. He was getting hurt in there. They ran that fight back, and then he looked worse than ever. That was the thing that was so alarming, is that he looked so much worse in the rematch. And that was really a a grappler versus striker type of affair. I mean, Crute was looking to get takedowns throughout that matchup there, and when he struggled, we saw him hurt. And I do worry about him on the feet. I think that Rodolfo Bellato is live to knock him out here. Rodolfo Bellato is a very well-rounded fighter. He's a fighter that's going under the radar right now. He looks like he's 39, but he's just 28 years old. So plenty of room for growth. We're going to see his game continue to excel. He's coming off a phenomenal fight against Ihor Potieria. He eventually got the finish. Yes, he did take damage in that fight as well, so he shows to be a little vulnerable. He's willing to go to war with you, so he'll give you opportunities to land on him as well. All right, as we see his 2 losses that he's had, he was knocked out in both of them by the same man, in Vitor Petrino, and those haven't aged that well, with Petrino showing to not be the fighter that we all thought that he could have. But understand, Petrino has serious power, but Bellato shouldn't have been in those positions to be tagged with shots. And Potieria landed on him, as I said, as well. So at times he's defensively out of position. He's there to be hit. Can Crute capitalize on him there? Possibly. Okay, but I think it's much more likely that it's Bellato that's landing big shots and hurting Crute in this fight. Look what he did. Look what Bellato did against Murtaza Talha. That was a huge victory for him. He was a big underdog in that spot. That was a main event of a Dana White's Contender Series episode where Talha was one of the real featured fighters of that season. And that was a really big performance from him there. Besides those 2 blemishes that he had against Petrino, I mean, he goes out there, he gets the job done. I think there's some real potential that he brings into this division. We'll see how he looks when he's 31, 32. But I think that Bellato, the fighter who's been more active and just seems to carry those gladiator type of vibes. If you guys know what I'm talking about, I throw that phrase out there once in a while. If you guys know what I'm talking about, of course, all these fighters are gladiators, but some of these fighters just seem to have a little bit more of a gladiator vibe. They're not really there to talk too much. They're very game. They're willing to go to war. They're very stoic. He reminds me of a character that would be in like Spartacus or something like that. And I think that he gets the job done here. And this is going to be brutal for Crute. It's really going to be a tough loss for him because I don't know if he gets another opportunity to fight in the UFC after this one. I think Rodolfo Bellato finds a KO in this fight. I think they go to war. I think that Bellato can stuff the takedowns and handle any of the jiu-jitsu that Crute throws his way. And as they're striking it out, I think that Bellato is more dangerous and lands the mark. All right. Right now, Bellato is right around a -150 favorite. This is a familiar line that we're seeing throughout this card. And I would say the value is still on him. It's not that steep of a line. I think that he's the better fighter. Crute will have the crowd going behind him, but that's not really going to matter in a fight like this where there's going to be some damage inflicted one way or another. We're going to see one of these fighters get hurt. There's going to be significant points of time throughout this fight that's really going to give the judges an easier decision to make. Even if there's not a stoppage, we're going to see a clear victor round to round, and I think that Bellato gets him out of there anyway. What a heavyweight clash we have here. We have the UFC debut of Thaleson Teixeira, who I am really trying to get a movement put behind getting his nickname to be declared the Juggernaut. Okay, this dude just screams Juggernaut to me. He's taken on the Badman, Justin Tafa, a very crisp and dangerous striker. This is a massive step up in competition for Teixeira. He's just 25 years old. He's a young buck. He hasn't fought near the level of competition of a fighter like Tafa. Tafa can knock anybody out. Now, I'll tell you this. In Teixeira's last fight on Dana White's Contender Series, he took on Arthur Lopez. He got that knockout in under 2 minutes. It wasn't without any adversity. Arthur Lopez really pushed the pace in that fight and was looking to land on him. And we saw Teixeira. I don't know if I would say he's vulnerable to being hit, but he's not scared of it. He's not a stranger of it. He will give you opportunities to land on him. He's willing to kind of engage in a war where he then looks to land his own KO. That could be dangerous against a fighter like Tafa. But I'll say this, Arthur Lopez has a very different fighting style than a Justin Tafa. Tafa is a counter striker. Okay, Arthur Lopez was on the gas throughout that entire fight. He was trying to land his own early finish. I think the fact that Tafa is a counter striker could pay dividends for the youngster. You take a look at the difference in frames these fighters have, which also note, it lists Teixeira with a 79-inch wingspan here, but I've been seeing him listed as having an 84-inch wingspan, okay, throughout other sites. So I'm willing to bet that it's over 79. Maybe it's somewhere in the middle. Maybe it's around 82, 83, but I think it's more up in the 80s than around 79. And you take a look at Tafa, who has a 74-inch wingspan. Teixeira is creeping up on almost a decade of a reach advantage, right? He has right around a 9-inch reach advantage. And as Teixeira looks to land from the outside, that would really force Tafa to be more aggressive than he normally is, which could expose Tafa to be hit with his own counter strike. Now, that's going to be a tough task for a young fighter who's just 25 and Teixeira to go in there and to implement that type of game plan. Especially, I don't know how much confidence you would have in him pulling that off when you saw him in his last fight, kind of getting in the pocket at times and exchanging. I think there's a very likely scenario that he's in the pocket with Tafa. So I think that Tafa is definitely live to land a KO in this fight. And when you look at the way he's moving in there, yeah, he came up short against Carl Williams. He was put on his back like a turtle. That's one aspect of his game that he's lacking in with his grappling and his get-up game. But look at the fights that he had before that L, right? He essentially had two victories against Austin Lane because he's knocking out Austin Lane anytime they're in there. Unfortunately, there was that eye poke, but we know how that fight was going to go. We saw it in the rematch. Went out there, was just moving on a complete different wavelength than Austin Lane. He did it to Pork Reporter. He did it to Harry Honeysuckle, two low-level fighters, but still, the way he lands, the precision, it's very high level. But as I said, he does struggle with his grappling. We saw Carl Williams take advantage of him there. Jared Vandera, some of these fighters have taken advantage of him there. And he's not immune to being KO'd in his own right? We saw Jorgen De Castro land a nasty counter strike on him way back in the day in 2019, okay, which is definitely a point that we have to bring up because Teixeira is going to look to land that KO. And I think we're going to see a KO one way or another. And I'm willing to back the youngster here. Bigfoot Jr. Maybe that's another nickname you want to give him. Definitely some Bigfoot vibes going on. If you guys remember, Antonio Silva, man, I bumped into him at an LA Fitness once before. He was working out on the machine right next to me. He was doing a leg press. I'm literally on the machine next to Antonio Bigfoot Silva, looking at his huge feet press on this panel type thing, pushing, doing the leg press, dude. Imagine the size of his feet. It was crazy seeing him in real life. Teixeira has some of those vibes going, and I really hope Teixeira looks to put it together. I think he could be a character in this division for a long time to come at just 25. I think he could put on some crazy performances, and we'll see some of the most spectacular KOs we've seen in this division throughout the years. I think that's the type of potential that he has. Either fighter can get knocked out here, but I think it's more likely the youngster can get a knockout, and I think there's also another element that he brings to the game. If he chooses to fight more with a more cerebral type game plan, maybe we see him even try to take Tafa down and get on top of him. If he gets on top of Tafa, Tafa's not getting up. He's going to have to wait to the next round, or he may even get finished because Teixeira on top of Tafa, there's no way Tafa's getting up. Teixeira's huge. All right, let's take a look at the betting line. We got that awfully familiar betting line. Teixeira is right around a minus 150 favorite. Come back on Tafa right around plus 120, plus 115, 120. I think that the value's on Teixeira. I'm going to buy in on the hype a little bit. This is a big jump up in competition. He hasn't really fought anybody thus far, but the way that he moves, I think that this kid's the truth, and he'll start to continue to put these KOs together. Hey, guys, real quick, I just want to say thank you for tuning in to the show here. Thank you so much for hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. Don't forget, you could always reach out to me for any type of inquiries. If you want to work with me for my official plays, if you have any advice for the show, if you have any skills you could help me out with, man. If you're good at graphic design, streaming, video editing, and all that type of stuff, would always like to hear from you guys. I have this fight right here marked as one of the most elite women's mixed martial arts bouts that we've ever seen. Okay, my number one is probably going to be Valentina Shevchenko versus Amanda Nunes. All right, but you talk about a matchup between Weili Zhang and Tatiana Suarez. You're talking about one of the most high-level women's mixed martial arts fights that we've ever seen. We need to see more from Suarez. I mean, if she goes out here and wins this fight, this is definitely towards the top. Suarez is 10-0, still undefeated. She has crazy wrestling accolades. And you may be saying, oh, she's only 10-0. She hasn't really faced anybody. She hasn't been that active. Yeah, she hasn't been the most active, but take a look at her resume. Okay, take a deep look at it. I mean, she has victories over 3 former UFC champions, right? And Jessica Andrade, Carla Esparza, and Alexa Grasso. All right. She also has a submission victory over Montana De La Rosa. That was that big comeback fight where she was away from the cage for about 4 years, and she went in there and looked stellar, pulled the sub off. Of course, she was out of the cage once again for over a year, and then she went in there and she subbed Jessica Andrade, caught her with that guillotine choke. And that fight actually took place quite a bit ago. That fight took place in 2023. So she's not foreign to coming into a fight off a long layoff and delivering. So even though she hasn't been in there that recently and she hasn't been that active, don't expect her to not step into the cage and pick right back up where she leaves off. She is an elite wrestler. You take a look at some of the accolades that she brought into MMA. She was a gold medalist in the Pan Ams. She was ranked the #1 female freestyle wrestler in the country in high school. And she has all types of medals. You look at the world champions, the world junior championships, jiu-jitsu championships back in 2015, 2013. I mean, she has all types of medals. She brings a serious wrestling background into MMA. So even when you look at her, you say, oh, she's just 10-0. She doesn't have an overwhelming amount of fight experience. She's a chick that has been in competition throughout her life. Okay. She started wrestling before she even turned 4 years old. Okay. She's a career martial artist, right? Of course, wrestling, one of the staples as far as martial arts goes. She's been doing it since she was a little kid. And you guys know I'm always very high on these fighters that have been, it's the best if they've been training overall MMA, but even when they're training a specific discipline that's pivotal to the fight game, whether it's kickboxing or wrestling or jiu-jitsu, when they've been doing it from the age of 3, those fighters are problems. Now, I could sit here and rave about Weili Zhang for just as long as I did about Suarez. I'll save you guys from that. You guys know I'm very high on her, and I do believe that Zhang is the more complete fighter when you take a look at the wrestling abilities, the grappling ability she has, mixed along with her high-level striking. If she can keep this fight standing, I think she does have a clear advantage. Is she going to be able to keep it there, though? Because you take a look back at that Yan Xiaonan fight. Yes, she dominated. I mean, take a look at the numbers. I mean, they were crazy. She outstruck her 256 to 73. She was 6 of 9 on her takedowns, but don't forget, she was taken down 3 times. Yan Xiaonan was 3 of 3 on her takedown attempts too. She had 100% takedown efficiency against Zhang in that fight. Remember in the first round, she ripped Zhang down. It was kind of interesting to see that, especially as I was just rewatching the tape. I have a strong feeling that Suarez is going to be able to get this fight down to the mat. The key is, what is she going to do with it? Is she going to be able to find that finish? Is she going to be able to cinch up a sub? We've never seen Zhang sub before. And if Suarez doesn't have that initial success, is she going to be able to maintain those consistent takedowns throughout the fight? Or does Zhang start to look better as the fight goes on, like she did against Yan Xiaonan, start to land her own takedowns, or just be able to stuff takedowns and use her striking to get the better of this matchup? I think that is the real question. When Suarez gets you down to the mat, man, she has long limbs for this division. She's very tricky with her subs. You take a look at her 10 victories. She's pulled off a submission in 7 of them. Okay. And as of recently, we already talked about the guillotine choke she just pulled off on Andrade. She pulled off a nasty guillotine choke on Montana De La Rosa. That's like her go-to move there. Landed a rear naked choke on Alexa Grasso. Back to the Ultimate Fighter finale, she landed that nasty Darce on Amanda ABC Cooper. She had another guillotine choke on Kate Jackson throughout the Ultimate Fighter. She subbed the boxer JJ Aldrich with a rear naked choke. Okay, so you're seeing a very similar trend. Okay, when she gets the fight down to the mat, she knows how to find those subs. And, oh, guys, I've been so back and forth, and I'm giving you guys an up-to-the-moment decision here, all right? I've really been back and forth. At first, I was feeling a little bit more comfortable having the more complete fighter in Zhang, but I look at Zhang, she's 35 years old, and listen, Suarez is 34. She's not very young either, but Suarez has a lot less mileage on her. She hasn't taken really any damage as she uses her grappling. We've seen Zhang involved in some wars. At 35, she's slightly older as well, and she's came up short in the big fights. Let's not forget when Rose knocked her out in the first round. Not to say Suarez would knock her out. I don't see anything happening like that, but maybe we see her have a mental lapse in the first round and get caught in the sub early on. This is a good fight, and I'm going to give you my pick right now. My pick is Tatiana Suarez to not only win this fight, but to find the submission over Weili Zhang. Tatiana Suarez right now is right around a plus 125 to a plus 130 underdog. All right, guys, I'm slicking the mullet back over here. We're taking the dog out for a walk again, and a big-time fight spot, right? Another co-main event, main event, underdog pick here for the teller. Let's see how this one plays out. This one, you guys got to comment below. Let me know if you guys agree or disagree with me on the pick here. But I say that Suarez sinks in a rear naked choke. And then we had the headliner. We got the middleweight championship of the world on the line. This time, DDP is the champion going into the fight. Of course, last time it was Strickland that walked in with his belt after dethroning Israel Adesanya, and one of the biggest upsets that we've ever seen in the sport. Now, of course, one luxury we have with a fight like this is the fact that we just saw these men in there with each other a year ago. And it wasn't just any old fight. It was a 25-minute war. So we really got to see what these two looked like in the cage together. A lot of controversy in the decision. Who did you guys have winning that first fight? I need to know who you guys had winning the first fight. I'm curious where the lean is. Initially, I thought that Sean Strickland should have retained his title as he was the champion. Okay, but if you really want to break down the fight, it came down to the third round as you guys are looking at the overall stats throughout the fight, which Strickland did outland DDP 183 to 140, but you can't just simply look at the fight in that manner. It really came down to that third round. In that third round, it was actually Strickland that outstruck him 31 to 29, and it was Strickland that was landing to the head, which he landed 29 of his 84 strikes, whereas DDP just landed 13 of 64 to the head. DDP was landing a lot of leg kicks and a lot of body kicks, right? Landing 10 out of 12 to the body and 6 out of 8 to the legs. You should put some more merit into landing on the head. So, I mean, there's definitely a strong argument that DDP shouldn't have snatched the title. But also note, too, he was mixing in these takedown attempts and he was putting Sean down on his butt for a second, but Sean was bouncing right back up. This, honestly, I don't really think there's a correct decision. In that situation, I would lean towards the champion retaining his belt. So I'm not going to really change it up. Now, one thing I am going to change up is I'll be straight up with you guys. I'm actually rooting for DDP to win this fight, whereas in the last one, I was definitely rooting for Strickland. Going into that last fight, Strickland just dethroned Israel Adesanya, a fighter that seemed to be impossible to stop. So, I mean, that was just such a spectacular performance. I liked a lot of the noise that Strickland was making outside of the octagon. He's a funny dude. He's a fun fighter. And I actually agree with a lot of the stuff that he says. Some stuff I don't, some I do. Of course, you're never going to agree 100% with somebody. Okay, but I liked a lot of the stuff that he brought to the table when he was in a fight. He made fights exciting. You guys know I like the banter. I like the crap talk and all that. But, you know, the more I got to see these two gentlemen go at it inside and outside the cage, it's really DDP that's the fighter that I admire more so. I think that he's more of a man's man. He kind of got that James Bond vibe going. He holds himself a little bit more classy and intelligent, but also he's a savage as well. Okay, I like the fact that he's a savage, but he's quick-witted. He doesn't take crap from anybody. He's willing to get on the mic and dish it out. He could take it, whereas Sean Strickland's kind of like a whiny kid. I can never stand dudes that like to dish it out and talk a lot of crap, but then when you go at them, they get all sensitive and all awkward. I can't stand dudes that did that because trust me, I'm a big shit talker. I've always been when it comes to sports. I was always a big sports dude. And when I play sports, I like to banter. When I play video games, I like to banter. That's just the way that I am. If you can't take it, that's your problem. I grew up in a household, you know, with brothers, cousins, where that's how we did things. Okay. And I can never stand, I mean, I got stories for you guys. I can never stand those kids that are crying or getting all serious, trying to buck up like they're going to do something and they get awkward. Okay, and that's kind of the vibes that I get from Strickland. And besides that, Strickland hasn't been delivering in the cage like a lot of you guys think that he is. Okay, and obviously it's starting to be known. When you take a look at his performances, this isn't a dude that's really going out on his shield and looking to do the man dance. I mean, that Paulo Costa fight was a masterpiece as far as how he wasn't able to be touched and he was, you know, picking Costa apart. But he wasn't bringing the fight. He wasn't looking to get a finish in there. Even in the Israel Adesanya fight, he hurt him in the first round. He never looked to get Adesanya out of there after that when Adesanya really had some mental issues throughout that fight after being dropped in the first round. He never looked to step on the gas like DDP did when DDP finished Israel Adesanya. Strickland was looking to squeak by and get his hand raised. That's not the type of fighter that DDP is. DDP is a bona fide finisher. Okay, that's what he goes out there and looks to do. That's what he does. He'll sub you. He'll knock you out. He's been doing that ever since he made his UFC debut. He's more of a man's man, and I'm more of a fan of DDP. Now, we'll put that all to the side. How do I actually see this fight playing out? I think that DDP is bringing all the momentum into this fight. I think that he's more likely to get his hand raised. He's still only 31 years old. Okay, he brings in more power. He's more imposing. He brings in the wrestling and with the strength, with the takedowns. I could see him putting Strickland on his butt again here and there. And I think that DDP has a better fighting spirit. We saw it, man. Strickland, was it the fourth round where Strickland really dropped that one? He was bloodied up and he kind of took that round off. DDP was pushing the pace, bringing it to him. You don't see that with DDP. Good luck. You could hurt him land a big shot on him, he ain't taking a back step. He ain't taking a round off. That dude is built differently. He has crazy cardio, and I think that he has pretty much the best heart in the game right now. Okay, he's definitely in the Mount Rushmore as far as fighters with heart and warrior spirit. And I'm taking DDP to win this fight. I really hope that he finds a finish. It's not easy to find that finish on Strickland. We know Alex Pereira knocked him out, but listen, defensively, he's really something else. It's kind of interesting when you look at the numbers as both fighters almost mirror each other as far as what they're landing per minute and absorbing. But, you know, the Sean Strickland being absorbed at 4.48 strikes per minute, that kind of had me scratching my head. I think some of that's due to some of his earlier fights, because you look at the latter portion of his career and he's not getting touched. He is not an easy fighter to touch. But in their first fight, these guys did clash, and there was a pretty high volume to it, and he was touched up a bit. And I think DDP can replicate that again. Maybe this fight plays out closely. I see DDP prevailing in that sense. But if we also see a finish in this fight, I think that DDP can get Strickland out of there. He does drop his hands. He keeps his hands low. Even though he's hard to hit, I could see DDP maybe cracking him with something. And I'm going to say DDP wins this fight. Do I have him getting the knockout, man? I've been back and forth with that. Strickland is not an easy guy to get out of there. I'm going to lean towards a decision, but don't be shocked if we see a crazy knockout victory for Du Plessis in this spot. He retains the champion, and he is one of the biggest stars in the game right now. And you take a look at the betting odds. He's right around a -190 to a -200 favorite. I do not like those odds. I do not like those odds. It shouldn't be that steep. Strickland is the real deal, and he can definitely keep this fight close. I think the value would have to be on Strickland, who you can catch at right around a +165. We're going to monitor the line movement with this fight all throughout the fight week. We got some time here, and well, let's see where that line goes. I want to talk more about this. I hope that the line does come down. I would like to get Du Plessis right around like a -170, 160. I would feel a lot more comfortable with it there, and I would like to have action on that fight. We'll see how that goes. All right, guys, that's going to wrap this one up. Special shout out to all you guys that hung out with me here till the end. Please hit that like button before you depart. And I got to leave you guys with some parting words. Real quick, though, I say this is a card that I'm looking forward to. I'm excited for this card. We talk about some of these young prospects that really have potential besides even just the last two fights. And I know some of you guys aren't as high on it. Remember the last pay-per-view event we had was UFC 311. That was a very stacked card. So it's to be expected that people want to see every pay-per-view event as stacked as that one was. And even though a lot of fights fell out in that and it didn't play out to be exactly what we thought it was going to be going into it, still a solid card. But this is a good one. So enjoy it. Enjoy yourself. Take care of yourself. Have you guys heard about the whole Bobby approved app? That's something I want to throw out there to you guys. You guys know I'm always preaching about taking care of your body and eating healthy. There's this app. If you haven't heard about it, look it up. It's called the Bobby Approved app. It makes it very easy for you. Okay. And again, I'm not getting paid to say this. This is just me trying to look out. You have this app. You go to any of your supermarkets. It doesn't matter. It works for all the supermarkets. You scan whatever you're about to buy before you buy it and check out if you should be eating that stuff or not. Okay. And that's something that I've been kind of learning about over the last 5-6 years. I've been diving into this. So I kind of already know what I should and shouldn't be eating. But if some of you guys don't know as much and you don't read up on some of this stuff, it'll explain to you why you should avoid a lot of the stuff that's in your face on a daily basis. Don't eat that crap. Don't drink that crap. You'll feel better if you don't. That's one step towards bettering yourself. And we'll talk about other ways you could better yourself. Of course, episode to episode, you guys know I always love to hit you with some parting words. Make sure you guys bet responsibly. Signing out. Teller.
The teller.